Hello and welcome to Random Fandoms, the video series about the things that we love from Billings Public Library. I'm Barb, and today I'm really happy to bring you an interview with Lynn Zubernis, who is a psychology professor and author of several books about one of my favorite shows, Supernatural. Today in this interview we talk about her books, most specifically There'll Be Peace When You Are Done and Family Don't End with Blood, in which she brings together crew, fans, and also actors from the show to talk about the influence that has had on their lives. And we also get into some interesting, really fascinating discussion about fandom communities and how they can bring out a sense of belonging, creativity, and just be a really positive influence on people's lives. So I really hope you enjoy this interview. Let me know what you think, and if you are interested in Supernatural and don't know where to start, come and find me in the library. I'll point you in the right direction. Enjoy. Hi, Lynn. Welcome to Billings Public Library by extension. Could you start by telling me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in fandom studies and Supernatural?
Sure. My name is Lynn Zubernis. I'm actually a licensed clinical psychologist by training, so I don't have a degree in fan studies or media studies, so I came at the study of fandom kind of from a different way. I was a clinician for many years, and one of the things that I noticed when I was a clinician is how important it was for people to have something that they were passionate about in their life. So that was one avenue that kind of got me really interested in fandom as something that is really healthy and beneficial for people. The other thing that got me interested in studying fandom was my own experience, because I fell in love 15 years ago with a television show called Supernatural, and
Right.
I had never really been fanish like that to that extent before, to the extent that I wanted to be part of the community and I wanted to create, and I wanted to find out what was happening with me and was it really an okay thing and a good thing. So I decided as a researcher that I would study fandom, and now it's 6 or 7 books later.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of 6 or 7 books, a lot of different kinds of books. You've talked about your experience with the show. There's a more academic book I know that I think was published first, right?
Yeah, that was the very first one.
Right. And then most recently, the editorial compilations where people discuss both the sort of a meta-analysis of the show and also the most recent ones, which are the actors and fans talking about the shows. And I was just rereading the introduction to Family Don't End with Blood this morning, and one line jumped out at me, which you already kind of touched on, but I kind of wanted to quote it back to you if I could, and we could talk about that. The line is, "We yearn for something to ignite our passion, inspire our intellect, and validate our emotions." And how would you say that people find that in fandom? How does fandom work to fulfill that need?
I mean, I think the way people find that in fandom is 2 ways. First is we are drawn to things that really speak to us and that we find inspiring. That is part of the way humans have always constructed their identities. We've always looked for other people, and it can be fictional people as well, to inspire us so we can sort of take on their attributes and try them on and figure out what fits for us and what we want to be. So when we're passionate about something, we look to that thing, whether it is a television show or a film or a book series or a sports team or a band, whatever it is, we look to find inspiration in that thing and in the real life people who are involved with that thing. So that's one part of it. But the other thing, the other way in which fandom works is that when you're passionate about something like that, you also are naturally drawn to other people who are passionate about the same thing. So we seek out those people who are kind of like-minded people who are passionate about what we're passionate about. And then having that community becomes an inspiration in itself and sort of a support system, whether it's in person or whether it's online, to allow us to further explore who we are and further figure out who we are, and often to sort of come together and engage in joint projects. There's tons of charity work is done around fandom communities. So it works in both of those ways.
Right. Yeah, and Supernatural in particular is one that has been known for its charity projects. In fact, a lot of the first book, I think, is devoted to discussion of that sort of topic, you know, how the show helped people to get through a hard time, or introduce people to different charities. And of course, the actors themselves are very active in charity. How do you think that plays out in the fan community?
I mean, that has played out in the fan community since time immemorial. Like that's been around for a long time, but I think it's much more obvious now, because once fandom moved onto the internet, it was people were a lot more able to come together and organize. So there's always been that impetus to kind of make the world better and come together to do that. But now it's done in a much more organized fashion. So somebody like Misha Collins on Supernatural, I remember sitting down with him like weeks after his first episode had aired. Like he was very new to the show, and already he was asking us questions as sort of fandom experts, like, what's this thing called fandom and what is it used for, and how can I sort of utilize it in a very positive way to do something good? Like that's where his brain was going. And we told him, I mean, that's already where fandom is. So you're right, you know, harness this great power. And that's, you know, that's how a wonderful organization like Random Acts got started.
Right. Yeah. And Misha in particular has sort of an interesting relationship with fandom. It's because he both teases us and then he harnesses our power to really do good out in the world with all of the Gish and everything that Random Acts does.
Yeah, I just signed up for Gish again. I think this will be my 5th or 6th time gishing. I keep saying, I don't have time, I'm not going to do it again. And then it comes around and I'm like, oh no, I can do it again. It's for a good cause. I'm going to do it again.
I've heard, you know, I haven't taken the plunge on Gish yet. So since we're talking about it, can you explain just a little bit to people what Gish is, and maybe a little bit about your experience with that?
Sure. So it's an international scavenger hunt that is organized through it always benefits particular people, charities, and also some individual people. So Gish often it's very inspiring because it has a very personal impact. Misha and his organization find people who are in need of help, and you feel good because you're directly benefiting whatever Gish is going to help that year. And basically, it is a week of all kinds of zany challenges that you have to carry out, and it's up to you to interpret them and to carry them out however you want. So it's a wonderful way of really promoting creativity and encouraging people sort of not to be normal and to step outside the box. So it's very freeing. And I mean, I've done some very odd things, but they've been very memorable. I remember once a friend of mine, actually a colleague of mine, another psychologist who I work with, we have a Gish team that we do together and have for a long time. And there was some item that was go to a fancy restaurant with a hat made of kale. So we constructed these giant hats made out of kale. Of course. And we went to a local racetrack to its poshest restaurant in our kale hats and evening gowns. And then ended up taking pictures with the person who was like the maitre d'. And it was very, very strange and extremely fun. But I've done all kinds of odd things.
That's wonderful. I love it. And then somebody wins a team wins the Gish at the end of the year, right? And they get to have an adventure of their own.
And they usually get to go somewhere with Misha. But I have to say, my Gish team is you can either have a competitive Gish team or a just for fun Gish team.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Our team is a just for fun Gish team. Our only goal was maybe someday we'll get in the coffee table book that's put out every year. And last year, our team got in the coffee table book.
Nice. So. I'll have to look for that. Congratulations.
Goals.
Good job. Yeah, and that kind of speaks then to sort of where you started there with the self-expression too, about the fandom, how it can help people release that or take part in that.
Yeah, I think that's been life-changing. One of the big themes of Family Don't End with Blood, which was the first book that I did along with the fans and the actors of Supernatural, so many of the fans wrote about how that supportive community of fandom had helped them explore their own creativity. So people had become writers, people had become photographers, people had become filmmakers. It was amazing. And then the actors, the funny thing about Family Don't End with Blood is the actors ended up saying the same exact things as the fans. So it's a lovely kind of tribute to, we're all in this together, we're all humans. Because the actors talked about things like, you know, I've always wanted to sing, but I was terrified, but the fandom is so supportive that I took a chance and now I'm loving this, you know, or whatever it was. People have become writers, actors have gone into doing more writing because they dared to write a chapter for There'll Be Peace When You Are Done or Family Don't End with Blood and felt so supported that now they felt like they could do that. So yeah, fandom in its supportiveness can really help people with creativity.
Do you think that the more like mainstream knowledge of that we've seen in the recent years, and also more people embracing fandom, do you think that the cultural perceptions of fandom has changed over the last so many years?
Yeah, I think
yes and no?
I think yes. I think definitely. I mean, our early books like Fangasm Supernatural Fangirls, which is like our memoir of our crazy adventures through fandom and being fangirls, there was a lot of that book devoted to the idea of fan shame and sort of being ashamed to tell your family or your colleagues or your partner or whatever that, yeah, I'm a Supernatural fan. I think that has definitely gotten better. I think there is more understanding that there's nothing weird really about people who are fans. They're just people who are passionate about something. Just like we've never shamed people who are passionate football fans. I live in Philadelphia. I mean, no one has ever been shamed for being an Eagles fan, let me tell you. So some types of fandom were always acceptable, but media fandom and certainly anything identified as having mostly a female fandom, that was not so accepted. I think it's gotten better. I think there are still times when, especially female fandom, things that are looked at as mostly female fandom don't get quite the respect and still get a little bit of a semi-eye roll, but definitely better, better.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, I think you're right about that. I do find in my own experience that I'm careful about who I don't want to say come out to as a fan, but it does feel like that sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, with a fair amount of support from my family and friends and coworkers, I'm really careful about just going on and on about Supernatural. There was a meme from one of your first books that I read where somebody said, "Don't tell me I talk too much about my fandom. You have no idea how much I'm holding back." And I find that to be really true.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why, you know, things like conventions have become so popular, because it is very therapeutic and validating to be in a space where everybody's on the same page, and you can like jump up and down and get emotional when you come out of a photo op because you've just met the person who portrays your favorite character for the first time, and nobody is going to look askance. Everybody's just going to nod knowingly and be like, in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that feels really nice.
Yes, definitely. And Supernatural is kind of, I won't say unique, but it definitely has taken the convention experience to a whole different level.
Oh, I think it is unique. I mean,
Yeah.
it's literally unique. Like there has never been a show that has had the number of conventions that Supernatural has had.
Mm-hmm.
There's never been a show who, has at one point there were like 20 conventions a year for just that show all over the world.
Right.
So I mean, the reason that the actors were willing to write There'll Be Peace When You Are Done and Family Don't End with Blood, which is a weird thing in itself. Like, what actors decide they're going to write a book?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do that with another show. I couldn't call up a bunch of actors and say, hey, you don't know me, but do you want to write a book with me? But I could do that with Supernatural because they really have developed a reciprocal relationship with their fans. When you see people every 2 weeks, you can't sustain stereotypes about them. So if they came into it with negative stereotypes of fans, they had to get rid of them very quickly because these are people they were actually getting to know and interact with. So that's why they were comfortable writing a book, because they trusted the fandom to receive their chapters like as genuine, which is what's happened. So I think that's pretty unique.
Yeah, and they've also sort of embraced that self-creativity side, as you mentioned before. Some of the actors talk about in your books having stage fright, or not wanting to sing in public, or just being nervous about expressing themselves, and then just finding that it was a good place to be and to do that.
Even people I think that you would never expect. In Family Don't End with Blood, I don't think anybody expected Jensen Ackles to talk about being so nervous speaking in front of people that he couldn't give a toast at a wedding, and how much difference it's made to him to feel so accepted by the fandom. Like, now he's a rock star.
Right.
Now he can come out on stage and like blow everyone away. Or Jared Padalecki to talk about, when he was so depressed he didn't want to keep on going, and it was the fandom and the rest of the actors who got him through that. Like, I think that's a pretty extraordinary thing for actors to feel safe enough to be that vulnerable. And I think about like Shoshana Stern's chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, which, her character of Eileen has been such an important character in terms of representation, but that has also mirrored her own personal journey, and she was so candid and genuine about that in the book and wrote such a beautiful chapter. And it was hard for her, but it really kind of kickstarted her writing. And I was so thrilled last month she had an essay published in the New York Times. Like, that's how much she has embraced writing now. And I that's so awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. I do think that There'll Be Peace When You Are Done has a major theme of representation and inclusivity. Definitely Shoshana's chapter really touched me for that reason. And the Hunter husbands, Hugo Ateo and Lee, I want to say Rumor. Yeah, both of their chapters were really inspiring to me. And the idea of they were stepping out of the stereotypical representation, that it was more to them than just, here's a person who is deaf, but that's an aspect of them. It's not everything. Here's a person who's gay, but it's not everything. They're that and so much more.
Yeah. No, that was so much a part of what we wanted to do with this book, because I mean, There'll Be Peace When You Are Done is supposed to be sort of the goodbye to the show, the celebration of the show. So the most important thing to us was, if it's going to be that, it has to be something that everyone can see themselves in. Like, we very much didn't want to leave any fans out. So we really, when we talk about the importance of representation in media, it's all kinds of media. So it's including a book. So we wanted to have, all kinds of people in terms of sexuality and in terms of gender. We wanted to have somebody who was trans write about being trans and being part of the SPN family and what that was like, because that's so important. We wanted to have people of color, all kinds of people of color. We wanted to have biracial people and bisexual people and people with disabilities and, just everything. And that's kind of a huge undertaking. And of course, you probably never, there are going to be people who read it who say, well, I sort of see myself, but not exactly. I wish that I could see myself completely. But a
Mhm.
lot of people have responded that they really have seen themselves in the book.
Right.
It's not just diversity in terms of the fans who are writing chapters, it's also the actors who are writing chapters and talking about the characters that they played. Like Lee
Mhm.
Majdoub talks about playing a character who was non-binary. And we don't think of
Right.
Supernatural as like, oh, such a progressive show. They've done such a wonderful job with representation.
In fact, if
You know,
anything, it often gets knocked as the reverse. Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And guess what? They haven't done a stupend. I would never say this is the show we should put on the pedestal as like
Mhm.
really getting it right in terms of representation. But
Right.
what I think is really important about Supernatural is that it's had such an evolution in terms of diversity and representation. And that's not to put it on a pedestal at all, but that evolution, even when it's slow and even when it's imperfect, is still really important. And you can see that
Right.
importance in the chapters that the fans write about, you know, the character of Charlie or
Yeah.
the characters of the Hunter husbands, or Rick Worthy writes about playing the alpha vampire. Like, whatever it is, fans do need to find themselves in their favorite media. So they have found themselves in Supernatural, even if
Mhm.
we all might wish that that was an easier exploration.
Right. Right. In some ways, the messiness kind of helps. In a weird kind of way. This is just my thought. Just the fact that they're willing to be experimental and they don't always succeed.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
no,
messy and there's lots of room on the edges for people.
and
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the part of the bigger cultural conversation now, is that,
Mhm.
you know, this is such an important conversation and change is so absolutely critical right now,
Right.
but very few of us really know how to go about it, and we're going to go about it imperfectly, and it
Mhm.
kind of is an evolution and a process. So
Right.
I think Supernatural and its experience and its fandom and its cast have something to say about that, and we tried to really bring that out in this book so that
Right.
it would really be inspiring to everyone. That was the
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah. Well, I felt like you succeeded. I was very touched by both books, but in particular, just recently read There'll Be Peace When You Are Done, and really loved it for that reason, that I could see so many different aspects, both of the story itself and of the actors and the fans. It all just came together really beautifully. And it also made me realize, even though the show hasn't ended, we're in this weird kind of limbo where it'll end someday. We don't know when. Um, the whole that, for the fans, and kind of, and the community that's built around it, sort of the whole that it will leave behind. I know you've spoken about this before, but what do you feel about Supernatural ending? Do you have any advice or any insight into how to cope with that, or other things that end of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other purpose of the book. It's both a celebration of the show's legacy and also an attempt to be, really, for lack of a better term, kind of a transitional object that helps us,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that the show is going. I think the hardest thing about grief is when you don't feel like your grief is validated. Like
Right.
it creates a really complicated grieving process if your grief is what we call disenfranchised, if nobody validates it. And because we haven't come as far as we could have with fandom and being passionate about the things that we love, that is true in a case like this. Like, people will say things, not trying to be mean, but just dismissive, sort of like, it's a television show, get over it.
Right.
Not really understanding the importance that both the show and the fandom have had in people's lives for 5, 10, maybe even 15 years. So
Right.
I want the book, I mean, that's what my introduction to the book is about. It's all about grief and loss and how this is really a valid loss, because I think when it feels validated, that's when we can process it and move on to the remembering and the celebrating. We've got to get through that grieving process first. So
Right.
I also wanted this book to be very validating in, yeah, this has been really important. Read this book and see just how important it's been, and then you'll understand why the grief is very real.
Right. Yeah. And it'll leave something behind too, that I believe that people will keep finding your books, finding the show.
Oh yeah,
And
I
it won't
think,
really end.
just the fact that it has changed people so much, both the actors and the fans have been changed by this show, and we're all taking that change forward. Like, I'm a different person than I was 15 years ago before I fell in love with this show, and so many people are different in some way, and that's a beautiful legacy. And I think there will always be, it's been so important that there will always be times when we come together and celebrate it in some way. I picture 20 years down the road, we're having a Supernatural convention, and like they start to play Carry On Wayward Son, and we all still know all the words, and we're singing together, and Jensen and Jared and Misha are up there singing along, and it'll be awesome. It'll be very different, obviously, but it's not going to go away.
Right. I hope to be there too. That sounds like a wonderful place to be.
Absolutely. You can get an invitation. I'll make sure of it.
Oh, thank you. Great. I guess last question, just, so where will you be when Supernatural ends? Do you have plans already made, or are you just gonna
for the actual last episode?
For the actual last episode, yeah.
Well, I did have plans. So I was going to be in Lawrence, Kansas on May 18th when the show ended. There was going to be a big watch party. We were going to go visit Stoll Cemetery. I was going to be with friends who I have been on this crazy wild ride with for 15 years. I was so excited about that. Obviously, that did not happen. I'm assuming now that when it ends, we're probably all going to still be in relative isolation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it will probably be something online, but I'm quite sure that, fandom is also very capable of coming together online. So I feel like people all over the world globally will come together when that last episode airs, and we'll all sort of be with each other virtually, even if we can't in person. So I look forward to that. I think that'll feel good.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate you taking the time out to come and visit with me, and hope the rest of your summer goes well.
Thank you. That was a pleasure. I never mind talking about Supernatural, and it's been a lovely break from grading all of my final exams for my graduate classes. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to help.